Welcome to the UpSet podcast. It's Sunday, and tonight we are talking about literacy, ADHD, and dyslexia. Coming up next. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the UpSet podcast. We're so happy that you decided to spend your Sunday with us. And with us, I mean this awesome group of people right here. Hey, guys.
Hey,
Howdy.
happy Sunday.
Oh, happy Sunday.
Happy day.
Oh, happy
Not
day.
Charlie with Sundays. I don't know. He can't say Sunday. He can't say it.
It's that Adventist in him. I don't know. So how's everyone's week been? October is like a crazy month period, but
It is.
that was this week for everybody.
I had a great week. I was at the NAD Women's Clergy Retreat. We have it every 2-3 years. It was excellent.
Wait a minute. Women ministers know how to retreat?
Oh, yeah.
You guys have been moving forward so much in the last few. I didn't know that retreating was in the vocabulary.
Yeah, we have at least 354. I think it's more than
That's
women.
exceptional.
Isn't that wonderful?
That's in the North American division alone?
Yeah, and NAD. And that doesn't include the part-timers. That's kind of
Okay.
Wow.
time pastors and chaplains.
That's awesome. So is that growth? I mean, hearing that number.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Major growth. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Glad to hear that.
I want to put a feather in the cap of one of our female pastors because I happened to go by her church a Sabbath ago. I snuck into the Willow Grove Church where the great bishop, Reverend Dr. Chief Presiding Prelate happens to be one Reverend Marlena. And let me tell you, she is really, really, just watching the way she moves in and out of her people and the way that she demonstrates leadership. If anybody has to ask the question as to whether or not we should be debating or discussing whether women should be ordained and be in ministry, let them go to Willow Grove for a little while. Marlena, I really want to tip my hat to you. It was beautiful to see what I saw.
Oh, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. He came out on our 55th plus anniversary.
Oh, nice.
He had a big shebang, and he ran across the front of the church, and the church,
He really
Ran very slowly, Charles. The only thing I run now is my mouth.
They remember how he stood us up. And,
Oh, he's supposed to come before.
like that. We're still trying to forgive him for that, but anyway, it was good to see Tal.
Good to be there.
That's awesome. That's real great.
So happy Pastors Appreciation Month.
Oh, yes. To all.
In October now, yeah.
Yes.
So have you guys been enjoying it?
Well, as a retired pastor, I appreciate it a lot. I mean, a lot.
It's always funny because I notice our churches, I kind of keep an eye on how our churches are handling. I notice some do it the first Sabbath, they're on, some wait till the end, some sneak in the middle. So it's like,
and some do it all month.
That's true.
Some don't do it at all.
Oh,
that's true too.
I want to commend the members of the West Philadelphia Seventh-day Adventist Church for the way they honored their pastor, Pastor Ron Williams. I mean, it was just done with great dignity and with sensitivity and with caring. And I could tell, and I could see the difference that it made in Ron. I mean, it makes a difference when your people appreciate you. And West Church will never fail to let you know that they appreciate you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I saw also North Church. Not that you're picking on the Delaware Valley, but that's just what we have.
Well, that's the best way to.
But yeah, I saw that they had a nice presentation for Pastor Jimerson and Pastor Sherry on this past Sabbath. So that's nice. We love to see it. I can say it because I'm not a pastor. It's important, guys, to appreciate your pastor and find a way to make them feel special and let them know how much you appreciate what they're doing all year round. Even when you don't see them, they're still working behind the scenes.
They should ordain you, Latasha.
That's what the happy pastors later heard.
And I'm not even joking, because I remember there was another person who was a communications director who had never pastored, and he was ordained because he was in that position. They should ordain you. And I'm causing trouble right now. Why won't the brethren ordain you?
I agree with you.
Why won't the brethren ordain you? The only reason they wouldn't do it is because you happen to have ovaries. That's the only reason. I'm challenging the brethren to ordain you now.
Yeah.
And if they don't like it, they can fire me.
No, I agree with you, Tally. Latasha is one of the hardest working women in our conference office. She just does her job.
She's actually in the conference office.
And Holy Ghost filled. That's what's really amazing.
Thank you, guys. I mean,
Yeah, elders, why won't you ordain her? Tell me.
It's not on my radar, Tally, but I appreciate you advocating for that.
I don't care how you feel about it. I'm saying what's right to do. You know.
Amen.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the UpSet podcast.
Moving along.
I want to just throw a quick shout out at my church. They're always so very loving.
They really
when
are.
it's not even Pastoral Appreciation Month, they're always good to me. So I just want to thank them. They always surprise me and do great things. So I'm just thankful for them.
And Marlene, she's the Reverend Dr. DeBro is on the praise team also.
All right.
I didn't even know she sang.
Yes. What? I knew from camp meeting. She used to always sing on the praise team at camp meeting. That's how
she jumped up there, and I thought, is she up there to hold the mic?
Team at the we did like praise and worship for the senior youth tent for 4 years.
That's how
I mean, she was getting a little hit. She's getting a little hitch in to get along. You know, I tell you.
The singing preacher. Yeah. One of those. All right. That's good. That's good.
So I want to pivot a little.
Go ahead.
A little. Just a little. I have a little good news and a little bad news for my week. Because good news, Eagles 5-0.
Okay.
Wow.
You know.
Yeah. Anybody wearing any other jersey should be ashamed of themselves. How you doing there, GP?
The other part is that I have been following the problems in Jerusalem and in Palestine. To see the stories and hear the stories, no matter what political side you're on in this skirmish, there are so many innocent families on both sides that are suffering greatly. I mean, greatly.
Yes.
Folks. I mean, when you're cut off from food and water and, the resources you need to live, intentionally cut off. I mean, these poor people literally don't know what to do. I've seen quite a few sound bites of families who've lost loved ones and they only have the clothing on their back. This is 2023 and this conflict is still going on. It also gives us an opportunity. I mean, if you really care about this, you can start with the Bible and then go up to 2023. Try to get a little history behind this. Sometimes people don't know why there's this fight.
Right.
But this is a time to really dig into history and quite frankly, I think we need to be outraged.
Oh yeah.
About what's still happening. And of course, we don't want to leave Ukraine behind. I mean, the news cycle has shifted to the Middle East, but we need to watch it carefully and keep these people in prayer.
Oh yeah.
And maybe we should talk about this at another time. But theologically, and especially a lot of Black Christians who grew up in churches called Bethel and Zion and Shiloh have a romantic attachment to the geopolitical entity known as Israel, feeling that Israel is a God-ordained nation in the College of Nations, and that whatever they do is ordained of God. I love the people of Israel and the Jewish people, and I think it was heinous what Hamas did in those murders.
Absolutely.
But we cannot write a blank check to the nation of Israel to dispense death indiscriminately in response to what was done to them. We cannot do that.
Mhm.
I don't care how romantically attached we are, because what's happening over in the Gaza Strip right now is heinous and despicable.
It
Yep.
is.
And because it's happening from a
Absolutely.
distance where they're pushing buttons and planes are going over,
Right.
doesn't make it any less deadly than somebody, parasailing in and coming into your house and shooting you with a machine gun. Death is death. Terror is terror. And we have to address this thing a little bit more comprehensively.
I think, Tally, is everything you said so true. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place because you got all of their family, friends been taken hostage, as well as many
Yeah.
Americans and probably others.
Mhm.
And the terrorists have them. So they want to get their family members. And right now their main objection is to get the terrorists, though they don't want to kill the innocent Palestinians. And it's just a bad way. I was even praying God give them wisdom as to how to do this so
Please.
that
Yeah.
so many innocent people do not die
That's the
on
sad
either
part.
side. It's a tough thing right now. Very tough.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
We should do a show on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
I think we should. Yeah.
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 Yeah. We'll definitely add that to the queue. And to all of you
And
listeners.
let's pray that it does not escalate to something else,
Yes.
because it could involve other countries,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
it could be a mess there. But right or wrong, like I said, whatever side of this you're on, mostly it's the people in the middle,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Palestinians and the Israelis, who
Oh,
are
yeah.
dying innocently. They're not part of the conflict. They're just people trying to live, and yet they're caught in the crossfire. So let's keep those families in prayer. There are quite a few Americans who've lost people on both sides, Palestinians and
Mhm.
Israelis, who live in this country,
Mhm.
family members. Some of them can't be reached because of what's going on. So,
You know
uh,
the number of us that visit Israel for just historical trips.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were actually
Think
planning
about
on
some of them could
Yeah.
be hostages or
Yeah.
murdered. What was it? There's over 22
right.
Americans killed now. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. It's real. All right, so we'll definitely talk more about that. When we have more dedicated time to do so. But in the meantime, as you said, we should definitely keep that situation in prayer. I know sometimes it feels like so far away, we feel so distant from it, but yet it still touches us so much. And so let's continue to pray for that situation. All right, now we're going to transition
Mhm.
to our topic, or topics, I should say, right, Marlena?
yeah.
For this evening, because we're trying to cover multiple things. One of the things we're realizing each month, there's several different awarenesses and things that we're supposed to dedicate our attention to. Of course, we can't cover them all. We only have 4 shows per month, but we're doing our best to try to tackle 3 of them that we think are important for us to touch on. So, Marlena, share with us what we're going to be talking about this evening.
Hello, UpSet family. We're going to talk about literacy. I think this is Literacy Month. We're going to talk a little bit about literacy and how it affects us as a people, our children, even affects adults. We're going to talk about some other diagnoses that cause low literacy, like dyslexia and ADHD. I want to talk a little bit about just a little bit, just to explain to you what the 3 of them are before we go into full detail. Illiteracy is the inability to read or write, to comprehend a reading and to be able to share what it means. Literacy is understanding, evaluating, using, and engaging with written text to participate in society, to achieve one's goal, and develop one's knowledge and potential. The thing about literacy is that it affects a person's ability to participate and function in the world. Statistics says about 18% of the US adult population is functionally illiterate. We know, I remember reading some time ago that by the time you get to the 3rd grade, if you have difficulty reading and performing math, you're going to have difficulties functioning in the world. Something about literacy is that it affects um, Hispanics, older people, incarcerated people. They're the ones most likely to be illiterate. Those who are of low income societies, they are more likely to be illiterate. Hmm. Good thing about it is that there are corrections to that. And they talked about how successful reading programs are. That once you have a good literacy program in your community, it changes and increases people's ability to be able to function. It improves the economy because now they can have better jobs, right? And be able to understand society. That's literacy. Much more to say about that, but we've got 3 to talk about today, so we'll move on to dyslexia. Some of you may have heard about dyslexia. You might have thought you were when you got your numbers twisted around. You might have felt like you were dyslexic. Some of the common symptoms are difficulty spelling simple words. I know you might say that's me, right? You might have that issue. Reluctance to read aloud in class because you're not sure about your ability. Confusing letters with similar shapes, and then mixing up the position or of sounds in a word. This is what dyslexia really is. It's a learning disability that disrupts how your brain processes written language. People with dyslexia have trouble with reading and related skills. It's very treatable and it doesn't have to stand in the way of success. There are many successful people today who have dyslexia, and you will never have known it. I just want to share this too, that dyslexia affects learned language understanding. Reading starts with spoken language. In early childhood, speaking starts with making simple sounds, right? And so the ability to read has to do with understanding sounds, comprehending the words, decoding is what is also states. That's how the brain processes the words, right? And the ability to hear. There were 3. And then how you store words and their meaning in your memory. All right. Now that's a little bit about dyslexia. All right. Now let's talk about ADHD, because some people I know very well have it, Tally. ADHD is one of the most common disorders of childhood, usually first diagnosed in childhood and often lasts into adulthood. Children with ADHD may have trouble paying attention, controlling impulsive behaviors. They may act out without thinking about what the result will be, or they will be overly active. Some signs and symptoms: it is normal for children to have trouble focusing and behaving at one time or another. However, children with ADHD do not just grow out of these behaviors. Symptoms continue and can be severe, can cause difficulty at school, at home, and with friends. Child with ADHD might have these difficulties. They may daydream a lot, forget or lose things a lot, squirm or fidget, talk too much. They make careless mistakes or take unnecessary risk. They have a hard time resisting temptation. They have trouble taking turns. They have difficulties getting along with others. This is something that was very interesting to me. Some of the causes they're not sure about, but they think that these are risk factors: brain injury, exposure to environmental risk, such as during pregnancy or at a young age, alcohol or tobacco use during pregnancy, premature delivery, and low birth rate weight. We may have seen many children, even in our churches, in our families, in our communities. They have been diagnosed with ADHD, and you see how fidgety they are. They can't sit. And I know some people whose parents were on alcohol and drug abuse when they were pregnant. And to hear this, that might be a cause of it. It's very interesting. You get to see why some of the children really act out. this is Literacy Month, so we want to talk a little bit about this today, and we're going to talk about um, how it affects children and adults. Some adults have ADHD, right, Tally? Some have it, and
I'm getting something. You keep referring to. Is this something you want to tell us?
brother, let me talk to my brother. And hey, as I read some of the symptoms, you might say, "Hey, I struggle with that," right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We have guest speaker, Miss Tosh. Would you like to bring in our guest for today?
Absolutely. This should not be a stranger to our UpSet audience. This is none other than John Alberty, our superintendent for AEC schools. Woohoo!
Welcome.
Welcome, John.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Mr. Averty. So, we talked a little bit about all three of low literacy issues here, but we want to talk a little bit first just about illiteracy, because I understand that the numbers are increasing in the U.S. And also, there have been studies to show that since COVID, that illiteracy has increased. Do you find that to be correct?
I do find that to be correct. Again, with literacy, of course, there are several reasons that could lead to illiteracy. Part of it could be genetics, like you mentioned. The other part can be circumstances. We see it more in areas where kids may not have as access to proper education or to libraries and things like that. Those are the factors that can be controlled. And so since COVID, again, students have they've lost having access to things they had access to before. Remember, these kids were at home. So not only did they fall behind in literacy, they fell behind in math, they fell behind in writing. And so, yes, the studies are correct, and we're seeing it. Kids are coming back into our schools, and they are playing catch up. They're playing catch up. Remember, a lot of students, depending on where they are, they don't have access to libraries. And if they're not at school where the teachers are forcing them to read, they were falling further and further behind. And so, yes, you're absolutely correct in saying that.
Can I ask a question, Superintendent Alberty? And that is, just listening to what you said, when I was growing up, back in, in the days when dinosaurs roamed the earth, if a person was illiterate, you could tell by the way that they would converse. You could hear it. They sounded as though they didn't have great facility. But is it possible now that a person can be illiterate, but because they're so accustomed to hearing things online and engaging online that they will sound literate? They're conversant, but that they're not literate, and that it can mask illiteracy?
That's a good question. So we think of dyslexia as being illiterate, and that's not the case. People with dyslexia, the majority of them have normal intelligence. You have a lot of famous people, a lot of scientists, a lot of doctors, a lot of people who are dyslexic. Again, it's not because of their intelligence, it's about their ability to code, to sound, and so on and so forth. And so just because someone is dealing with dyslexia does not mean that they are illiterate or they would sound illiterate. These are people, you have people who are dyslexic that have PhDs, master's degrees, because they've learned to compensate because the intervention was put in place early on.
I mean, but what I was really asking was, it used to be that if a person was illiterate, it would be demonstrated because they weren't that well informed. You can't read, you can't learn certain things. But nowadays, people are online and they're listening to all of these conversations, gathering all this information, but they really can't read. And so I'm wondering if our media centered world is masking illiteracy.
It's in some aspect it may be. Again, illiteracy is different from dyslexia. Again, you don't need to pick up the newspaper. When my mother-in-law lived with us, we had the paper delivered here because that's what she was used to.
Yeah.
My kids would never read the newspaper. Everything they need, they can get right off of social media, off the news, off of television. And so they can have those intelligent conversations because they have so many other means of getting information outside of just opening a book or picking up the newspaper, so on and so forth. And so I don't know if we would say, yes, so masking it as far as a person's ability to gather information by reading, yes, because there's so many ways to now input information.
Yeah, because you have things that will read things to you. Like, you don't even have to look at the
Yeah.
words anymore. We have
Mhm.
audiobooks, everything can be automated. So, like you're saying, Tally, people can become familiar with the way words
Mhm.
sound, how to put a sentence together. But if you hand them something to read, that's
Mhm.
becomes a challenge. And I remember even being in school and that happening to some of my friends. You're talking a good conversation, you think they're, one of the top people in the class, and then when the teacher calls on them to read aloud in class, you see them struggle, and you're like, Where's this coming from?" And that's kinda where you pick up on, maybe there are some things that are missing. In some cases, it was illiteracy, in some cases, it was dyslexia. So,
Mhm.
just interesting.
Mm.
Mr. Alberty, once people become illiterate, is what's the what's the difficulty? Or let me phrase it this way: is it? I know that when I read it, it can be corrected, but we find some people will not do what's necessary to correct it.
Mhm.
So, how can it affect their lives?
Mhm. It's a good question. And just first, let me start by saying this because people are saying, well, why is Mr. Albert an expert? Just for the record, my undergrad degree is in special education. So I just want to preference my knowledge and where it comes from. And then my master's degree is in communication sciences and disorders.
Hmm.
Fancy way to say speech pathology. And so just so people say, why is he answering these questions? But that being said, what we find is the best way to deal with any type of reading disorder is that it's best to catch it early. And so a lot of times parents, and I get it, parents don't want their kids identified because they don't want them labeled.
Mhm.
However, problem is when you take too long to identify a student, then that child is missing out on getting the proper techniques in order to deal with their reading disorder. And I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly. And so the best thing that could happen is to make sure that child is identified early on. And so that way they can get the services. And if they're in public school, they will get it through what's called the individualized education plan. And so you will have that plan will be written just to deal with if it's a reading disorder, which dyslexia will fall up under. That plan will be written just to give them techniques to deal with that. And it's not just the techniques are not just for the students nowadays. The special ed teachers actually go into the classroom and work alongside the teachers as well. And if it's a good special ed teacher, then they include the parents in the conversation. So parents can be more patient with their children and make sure they're reading with them more at home because it really should be not just the school, but the parents as well.
So, John, how soon is that? Like, at what grade should teachers or parents really be paying attention to where their children are with reading? And I hear some parents say, "Oh,
Mm,
let's not put pressure. Let him learn or her learn at her own pace." But at what
mhm.
point is an issue? Maybe.
Every child is different. Every situation is different. I think when kids are in preschool, you're not really going to be able to differentiate what they're dealing with. When they hit kindergarten, it still may be a little bit more difficult. But once they get to about first to second grade, you can start seeing a difference when those kids really start recognizing letters, start reading simple words. By the time they hit third grade, you definitely will pretty much know if they're pretty much behind what their peers are. And again, one of the things that we do in any school system, public or at Venice, is that we do standardized assessments every year. So in our system, we give the map. So that gives teachers data to work with as well. And so again, I don't think it's ever too early. You may not want to start with identifying a student as having a disability, but if that child's in kindergarten or first grade, you may want to do more what's the word I'm looking for? You may want to do more interventions, just reading with them, reading aloud, tutoring. I always say you don't have to jump to does this child need to be put in a special ed program or have an IEP? You can just start with tutoring. And a lot of times with tutoring, you can catch students up. Truly, especially if it's not truly dyslexia, it might just be, like we said, environmental, child just wasn't reading enough, whatever the case may be. And so I say, don't wait till the child falls too far behind. Try to identify it as soon as possible and put techniques in place.
Hmm. You make mention of these evaluations and the ability to assess. When I was growing up, you know, we didn't have terms. I mean, dyslexia to me was just the opposite of datlexia. You know, we didn't know what was what. But now you got everything. You got ADHD. You got oppositional defiant disorder, and in my day, you know, they would just say he flicked it. You know, but now they have labels for everything. Are we injuring children? You made mention of this earlier. Are we injuring children by the affixing of labels when sometimes these things are just, they're not really a diagnosis as much as they are simply a description? And by the label being pasted on a child, it could, you know, put them in a position where they're treated a certain way based on that label. Is that problematic?
It depends on what that child is dealing with. So we look at dyslexia, for example, which is truly falls up under a reading disorder. Again, dyslexia may not ever go away. And so it's not labeling a child like that won't hurt them, not when they're getting the tools to fix it, not fix it because you can't fix it, give them the tools to cope and manage their dyslexia. Then we also have to remember the goal of an IEP, of an individualized education plan, is never to be long-term if possible. Really, the goal of that document is to help the child, and eventually, hopefully that child would test out and no longer need it. It's not supposed to be a long-term plan. It really is supposed to be a plan in place to help the child catch up to where their peers are. Now, again, there are going to be some students, depending on their disability, their classification, that may stay on it indefinitely until they graduate, and then they might switch to something up under the American Disabilities Act, if I'm not mistaken. So again, no parent, there are not too many parents that like labels for their child. However, there are those times where those labels are very beneficial. Again, because not only with the label do you receive the services, but there are also other accommodations that come with that label. Depending on the child's disability, you may say that even the public school can't manage that child's needs. And so now you get to put them in a specialized school, and that comes with having that label.
Okay.
John, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Chuck.
No, I was just going to ask, what is your research and experience say about how nutrition, number one, affects a child's learning ability, number two, socioeconomic, number three, emotional intelligence? You know, I just know that there are children, and maybe we have experiences that have had childhood drama that interferes with their ability to learn. What is your take on that? Because I mean, you know, I've read several articles where parents had, you know, taken their children to the doctor or to psychiatrists or therapists because they weren't learning well in school, their behavior was bad. It only turned out that the child was not eating well. No, that's not the first thing you think of, you know. Okay, my child has a learning, you know, is it the Cheerios? You know, but that is, there has been research on that, and it's shown that some children from the emotional side are suffering childhood drama. On the other side, a lack of proper nutrition that's interfering with their ability to learn. What are your comments on that?
So when we look at, let's say, since we're talking about dyslexia, I'll use that as an example. Dyslexia can come about as far as three ways: primary, where it happens in birth; secondary, where it happens afterwards; and then, which goes to your point, Charles, where it talks about, you know, it could be nutritional or something that child may be lacking; and then trauma dyslexia, where they might have a brain injury, and then it may come about. So there are external cases that could lead to a child struggling academically. Like we said, one of them could be a traumatic brain injury. Another one could be nutrition. You know, it's funny that you mentioned that, even though I know we haven't transitioned over to ADHD yet, But a lot of times before parents put their kids on medication for ADHD or ADD, whichever one we're looking at, a lot of times they'll change their diet. They'll remove things that have red dyes in them. They'll do a lot of things that really change their diet. And I've seen students who've been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD who parents have changed their diets, and that has worked better, if not equal to putting them on medication.
Yes, in fact, I've read several research articles that stories of parents bringing the child to a pediatrician, and this particular pediatrician, he's also a researcher. And while this woman was very desperate that her child was not doing well in school, behavioral, inconsistencies, and after careful study of this particular child and their lifestyle, the doctor said, you know what, just change her diet. See what happens in 6 months. And in 6 months, the stories, as the story goes, she came back for a follow-up, and she said, I have a different child now. She's not the same. Her behavior has corrected. She's doing well in school just by changing the diet. Now that seems, far-fetched, but I'm wondering how many of our kids are in school, especially inner city situations, where they are not getting the proper nutrition. And there is some trauma involved, emotional trauma involved, that they're having to fight against. And it's like a salmon fighting upstream. You're struggling, you're trying, but the tide against you is so bad. So it manifests itself in school,
right?
Either behavior or a lack of learning.
And that, Charles, you're talking about nutrition. Some of them are not even getting fed, period. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons so many of the schools have adopted a free breakfast program. Like they don't even, even lunch too. I mean, they have that as well. But I'm seeing more and more schools just the school boards just voting to provide meals for all students because of what you just mentioned. They realized that some children were not being fed before they left home. And so when they get to school, because they don't have anything, energizing them or providing nutrition, they don't have anything to give mentally, physically.
Well, I knew when I was going to elementary school, my walk to school included a half a dozen glazed donuts. And some chocolate milk. And by the time I got in the classroom, I looked like I was on drugs or whatever.
You were Mr. ADHD, yeah.
Well, and we grew up in North Philadelphia, where all of us ate from the 4 food groups, which was Twinkies, Kool-Aid, animal fat, and cholesterol. That was it.
Mr. Albany, I just want to ask you this, if you could elaborate a little bit more, because this really affects me, because when there is low literacy, it affects the child's future, right? Work, employment, furthering their education, crime, those kind of things. Can you elaborate on the importance of the parents working with their children? Because there's a lot of expectation of the teachers, and the teachers don't have time with one child, and they've got many children in a class, just so that the parents can understand the importance of it. You'll see children way up in high school, right? And they still can't read. They don't even, they may have 2nd or 3rd grade, reading levels. Can you speak to that?
Yes. And again, illiteracy is not always due to a disability. Again, it can be due to external factors. And one of those external factors may have to do with the importance that's put on reading in the household. And so for parents, I can't stress enough how important it is to have your children put down their tablets and phones and just read. And see, what people don't realize, literacy plays a part in every subject. And so people think it's just English and language arts, but no, social studies is literacy. You're reading. Science, you're reading. Math, when you get to those word problems, you're reading. And so for a student to be successful, literacy is crucial. And what we're seeing nowadays, students don't read the way they used to. Again, it goes back to what we discussed earlier. Can it be masked that they're not reading? Again, they spend so much time on their devices, and kids read now in bites. You know what I mean? They look at TikTok or social media, they read in bites. They don't read in paragraphs anymore. And they communicate in bites of information. And so for parents out there, it is important. I can't stress it enough. No matter, as soon as your child is able to start recognizing words, to put books in their hands. That's why we have Literacy Month, just to encourage, or days just dedicated to reading, or months dedicated to reading, to encourage students to read. And I will tell you, from working in an inner city public school system prior to coming over to Allegheny East Conference, I remember what our test scores looked like in literacy and reading. And when we started to attack that as a system, we started looking at the students' test scores, and we started seeing that a lot of those students were below basic in reading. We realized it wasn't that the students didn't have the ability. It just was, there was no, they weren't encouraged. And there were some gaps. Again, that's another thing. That's a whole nother conversation about gaps in learning that may look like learning disabilities, when kids it's not important to them early on and they just miss out. But what we started to do, we encouraged students, you had to read every day. Every day. And we put books in their hands every day. And even now, I know in a lot of our Adventist schools, if you go into our classrooms, a lot of our classrooms, they have in-class libraries. But when the student is done doing their work, they can go and pick up a book. And I say the same thing to parents. Before that child is able to turn that television on, how much have they read today? My dad, and I'll stop it after this, before I could turn the TV on, if I wanted to watch TV for an hour, I had to read for an hour. And so, yeah.
It's funny you should say that, John, because I remember my dad, he stressed, I don't know if he did it with my sisters, I'm trying to think about that, but I remember he stressed reading with me so much. I remember him incentivizing it in terms of, okay, you read 5 books, I'll give you $1 or something. It was, he was always challenging me. He always took me to the library, and I grew to love reading. Like, you couldn't find me without a book. I would take it with me to the grocery store. I'd take it with me everywhere. And it's funny because when, I started having children, I was like, all right, I've got to pass down this love for reading to my kids, all right, guys, let's read a book. And it wasn't like picking up like I thought it would. I thought it was just like,
you weren't offering them any money.
That's probably it. It wasn't like, I thought it would just be natural like it was for me. And it did force me to take a different method, but I still encouraged it. And now I see them as they're getting a little older, they're more interested in reading books. And I told them, I'm not talking about audiobooks. See, sometimes we get confused. Oh, I read a book. And what you mean is you listened to it for 2 hours while you were doing something else. I'm like, no, I want you to actually have a book in your hand and read the words. And I explained to them how this helps you with your writing. It helps you learn how to write better. It helps you understand. It helps you with spelling, because there were so many words I learned to spell simply because I read it in a book first, and you're like, oh, is that how you say, is that how that word is spelled? So it's so important as parents. Sometimes you say, oh, they just don't do like we used to, no, that's not enough. You have to encourage it. Like you were saying, you have to like be intentional about saying, no, read, and find ways to incentivize it. So yeah, it's so important.
Very good point. Let's shift to ADHD. I think that's a very important topic, because we see a lot of children that really look like they have ADHD. Now, Mr. Alberti, if you can just expound a little bit on this diagnosis, and and let's talk about treatment strategies. I know some people hate putting their children on medications. Children seem so lethargic. They just can't move around, right? Is that really necessary? Is there something else you can do to keep these children calm so you can teach them? Can you share with us just a little bit about the diagnosis and how to look out for it, not deny it, or something? I know we're talking about masking and labeling, but some of our children really are affected by this.
Yeah, and so we look at 2 different things. We're looking at ADD, which is attention deficit disorder, where the child does can be a little distracted, may not be as focused as he or she should be. And then you're looking at the one that's easier to notice or pick out, what is the ADHD, which has the hyperactivity part included. And so again, with both, there are a couple of ways that it can be dealt with. First of all, teachers should not be, or parents should not diagnose their children with having ADD or ADHD. That should be diagnosed by a provider. The pediatrician, if you see signs of a student not being able to stay focused or not paying attention or the hyperactivity, that you should go through your pediatrician if you want to do it early on. And what they normally do, they have a questionnaire that the parents will fill out, the teachers will fill out, and then they'll use that questionnaire to help make that determination. And if you're in public school, again, they have providers that can also do it as well. But again, it still falls through looking at that questionnaire, and then they'll make a diagnosis. Once that diagnosis has been made, then the question is, how do you deal with it? And again, every parent is different. I am not a proponent of telling a parent how to raise their child. I would never tell a parent you have to put your child on medication. And so you do have some parents say, okay, now we have a diagnosis. That's great, but I'm going to deal with it using other alternatives, natural alternatives, changing my child's diet. There are things you can do in the classroom. If it's just ADD and they're not focused, making sure that child is sitting up front, making sure he or she has frequent breaks. When they need to get up and walk out and go get water, don't penalize them because they're just doing it so they can stay focused. Don't put that child next to a window in the middle of the class. There's so many things you can do within the class. As a teacher, walking by that child's desk when you see they're not focusing, just maybe tapping your finger on the desk to get their attention. And then you do have the option of the medication. But I've done this for a long time. And when I was in public school, I was a special ed coordinator. So I remember students always talking about the fact you had those who did not like being on medication because they said it made them feel drowsy, or they knew it changed their personality. They weren't the same bubbly child that they were. They were more focused and they were paying more attention, but they didn't like it. And a lot of times when they put students on medicine for ADHD, they make it time release. So hopefully by the end of the day, it starts to wear out their system so they can go back to being themselves.
Can I ask a question? I know in some situations, some children, some students are misdiagnosed, or is it possible that there are some children who are just, energetic children, but because they don't fit into the mold of sit down, be quiet, pay attention, and it's not their way of learning, their preferred way of learning, how they're wired, that they're misdiagnosed? Is that possible? Does it happen?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, because what we find is that, especially with our Black boys, it's so easy for schools to throw a label on them because they don't learn the same. They don't have it. They don't necessarily have ADHD or any type of disability, but because they are maybe a little bit more rambunctious, or because that's just who they are, they throw a label on them, give them a diagnosis, and now they're stuck with a label that's not truly them. And I don't remember the numbers, but what I can tell you is that if you look up the numbers, students of African descent are more likely to get diagnosed than students not of African descent. We're number one, followed by Latinos. And so you're correct. A lot of times our kids especially can be misdiagnosed. And then this is just a plug for Adventist education. That's why when you have them in one of our 7-day Adventist schools, they're in a smaller group setting. We're able to pay more attention to them. And teachers in our schools have a tendency to love on our students, because our students in our schools are part of our community. We see them at church. And so we're less likely to recommend that they're labeled until after we've done everything we can to work with that child.
Speaking of the labels, though, because I'm thinking about the other students who interact with children who may exhibit some of these, and sometimes, we'll say, oh, that child has no home training, or even other children will say, what's wrong with them? Didn't their parents teach them to sit still? And I think sometimes our children can be educated about these types of that other people learn differently and share. Because sometimes I feel like kids catch on that something's different about so-and-so. But no one ever talks about it because we want everyone to feel like, they fit in, and we don't want to label anyone. But I feel like sometimes that causes even more distraction to other students. Whereas if it was a discussion or we talked about these different things openly with children, they could learn to understand, not be so distracted by their behavior because they know why a student may be acting that way and maybe can even support that child? Or is that too much to put on other students? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think kids, we don't give kids as much credit as we should. I mean, you have kids in first grade that can say, yeah, Johnny's he goes home and tell their parent, Johnny got out of his seat today. They know that there are some students in their classroom that are just going to be disruptive. They don't know why, but they know. And I think we can have those conversations. It depends on, those conversations just may look different depending on the age group of the students. Once they get to middle school, you really can start having those conversations about, including everyone, that some students may learn different, so on and so forth. And it's not about pointing out students, because what I learned is that when I worked in public school and they would send the special education teacher into the classroom to work in a more of an inclusion setting, trust me, they were working with students who weren't even identified as having disabilities, but needed the help. And so again, yeah, I think we can have those conversations. It's just, how do we have those conversations?
Yeah.
Mr. Alberty, speaking on this, we see children hyperactive no matter whatever the cause. How should one deal with it? Like, how do we treat children that are like that? What should we do?
It's a good question. I think
I remember what they did to me in school.
Uh-oh.
Yes, sir.
Well,
they applied the Board of Education to the seat of my pants.
Well, they don't use the Board of Education anymore. But that's a good question, because what we find a lot of times when you have students who are disruptive, it doesn't just impact their learning, but it impacts the learning of the students around them. And so that is a big issue. And I think, we have to look at it two ways. In our Adventist education settings, it's hard. You have a teacher that may be already dealing with a multi-grade classroom, so they can have third, fourth, and fifth in the same room. And then they have, on top of that, they have to deal with a student who may be a little disruptive. I would tell you, for students like that, the best thing that you can do is to make sure that the family's involved. You're putting strategies in place. And then at some point, you have to ask yourself the question. It's a hard question in our Adventist schools. Are we able to meet this child's needs?
Yeah.
Trust me, I have a class right now. And so for those who don't know, I'm doing double duty. I'm back in one of the schools serving as a principal, because we have not been able to fill that position. So I'm superintendent. And I am looking over school. And I will tell you, in some of the classrooms, we have some of those issues where we've had to put a lot of strategies in place with some of our students. And I've told those families, I said, our goal is not to put your child out. Our goal is to work with your child. And I always tell them the same thing. But if we reach a point where we realize we can't meet that child's needs, it's not about putting him or her out. It's about making sure that you put that child in another setting that can meet their needs. Because sometimes we do these students a disservice by keeping them just to keep our numbers. And that's not fair to that child or the students in that class. And so to answer your question, again, it's if we can't put enough strategies to meet that child's needs in place, then we have to have those hard conversations for the sake of that child, again, being put in the right setting, and for the students in that class.
Well, what do some of those strategies look like? What do they look like?
So, a couple of things. Preferential seating, making sure that child is sitting up close by the teacher. Frequent breaks. If you know that child is going to be disruptive or may have issues staying in their seat, giving them the opportunity to go to get water more often than other students, or do some things that allow them to get out of their seats. We've had situations where students have been very disruptive, and we work with the parents to where the parents are paying for a dedicated aide to be in the classroom, just to sit next to that child and help that child to stay focused. Within our system, we don't do IEPs, we do reach plans. And so we work that plan out in our reach documents on how we can make sure that child is successful. But again, preferential seating, the frequent breaks, and parents, and putting a plan in place where the parent is communicating with the teacher daily is also helpful. Because again, when students realize that they don't have to, that their parents are already going to know what they've done for the day when they get home, it makes a difference. But again, we have to be very careful if that child is truly dealing with a disability, as opposed to just being
bad,
disruptive. Well, we just have to make sure we know what we're dealing with.
Yeah,
So I want to ask a question. Oh, I'm sorry. So for churches, a lot of us have Sabbath school teachers who educate children Sabbath morning, and some people get banned. Like your child can't come back here, and the parent is just
Wow.
okay, I'm not going to come anymore. It happens because they're not equipped and they don't have the education.
I haven't seen that one.
I have. And so
I'm not coming down to the Tidewood area.
listen. So even with how they talk to the parents or how they, deal with them, it's just shameful. So how can we better educate our churches how to be more intentional about reaching children who learn differently, who are differently abled?
I think we have to be intentional about how we pick our Sabbath school teachers. Not to be funny, but we might need to pick Sabbath school teachers who may have a background in, like, teachers who have a background in education, who may have the skills because they're using them on a daily basis in their classroom. I think that's the biggest part. And if we don't have enough people to choose from that might have that background, we have to be intentional about educating our Sabbath school teachers. And so they're not just putting kids out. But again, there's a difference between having a disability and just being a child that the parent never taught boundaries to. Now, if this is a child that's just never been taught boundaries and just used to doing what they want to do when they want to do it, that's when you inconvenience the parents. Now, that's just my soapbox, and be like, Mom, you got to sit in the class with this child because you've never learned how to tell this child no. Now he's coming to my class or she's coming to my class, disrupting everybody else. So again,
is that the bad child, Tasha?
Yes.
I just want to go on the record. The superintendent have not used the word bad in the conversation. I'm trying to get reelected.
Upsetter. You use that word.
This label is brought to you by the communications department of the Allegheny East Conference.
That was just, back in the day, that was like the only way.
John, I want to kind of deep dive a little bit, if I could, in my research. It's amazing when you research topics, you find things make you go, or, you feel like you don't fully understand. But I want you to address this statement I found in some of my research. It says attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Okay, that's what it is a neural developmental disorder. Okay. Now it says this means there are differences in ADHD brain that affect a child's development. ADHD does not influence intelligence. It does, however, affect a person's ability to regulate attention, emotions, in results in hyperactivity and impulsivity, as well as organization problems. The part that I found interesting here is because we tend to participate in stigmas, that it says ADHD does not influence intelligence. I found that to be interesting because sometimes someone that is considered ADHD may also be considered unintelligent.
So, Charles, that's a good point that you brought up. And the public school sector, there are a lot of our students who have been diagnosed with ADHD. They don't receive services up under special education. They receive their services up on their 504 plan, which is basically saying that they are a general ed student that just needs accommodations to deal with whatever their disability, whatever their diagnosis is. I'm sorry, not disability, their diagnosis. So again, because a lot of our students who have ADHD or ADD, you'll find that although they may not seem like they're paying attention, or they may be up out their seats, when you give them a test, they do extremely well. They're still gathering.
I had a classmate like that in junior high. Yeah. I remember his name. I hope he's not watching. His name was Lauren. Extremely intelligent. I mean, he was the class clown. He would stand up on the teacher's desk and even mock the teacher that he's worn his jacket like 20 days in a row. I mean, he was just a real joker. But when it was test time, first one finish, A+, out the door.
And so again, it goes back to even what I said about dyslexia. It doesn't necessarily mean, or that intelligence is impacted. Again, we have, in fact, what you'll find is that there are a lot of geniuses that have ADHD and ADD. And I would tell you, one of the ways I believe you should deal with a student who's very intelligent but has a hard time staying focused is to make sure that you are challenging them academically. I mean, to help them stay focused. And so you're very correct, and that's the reason that in our public schools, a lot of times their services are rendered under a 504 plan instead of under IEP.
What is a 504 plan? I know we're pressed for time, but what is a 504 plan?
504 plan is, I forgot what law it falls under.
I thought it was a retirement plan. Like
no,
401k,
it is for
504.
It is no, just like just like special education services fall up on the IDEA, which is federal law. Same thing with 504. The difference is 504 is not for students who have it's not special education. It really is for those students who are just general ed students and that need accommodations. To make it simple, there's not the same amount of money associated with the 504 plan that's associated with an IEP. But the students still get the services, and they're not labeled as, I'm not saying labeled, they're not falling up under that special education umbrella.
Now, well, Marlena and John, first of all, thank you. I just want to say this last thing. I want to give a shout out to those educators who have to put up with all of this.
Oh, yes.
It's a tough job.
Yeah.
Especially the bad kids, right?
When I was growing up, I was alone a lot, as a elementary school, because my parents worked and my brothers and sisters were older than me. Didn't have a lot of time at home. But I can tell you, a little shout out to the Flintstones and the Jetsons, because when I wasn't watching them, I was reading. No, I love to read. I was at the library, bringing home books from the library. When I was alone, I found myself reading more. But I learned a few things from Fred Flintstone.
Yabba dabba do.
Well, this will be our last question, and then we will end. Knowing that low literacy and with whatever causes there may be, affects society, right? Affects our communities. What can we do as a church to help?
Good question. Is that for me or is that for everybody?
It's for everyone.
Okay.
But you're, I
think it's for the specialist. Yeah.
Well,
our job is just sit here and look pretty. You got to answer these questions, Superintendent.
I would say awareness.
Yeah.
Awareness. Our church need to be aware of this issue and know why it is and how it is. Not that they're going to be diagnosing kids in the church, but I think we could start with awareness, educating our people as to what that is so that their reaction to it will be proper. Just like the point I made about it doesn't mean that the child is not intelligent. Sometimes we sweep with a broad brush and we ostracize kids and what have you, because we think they're ADHD and we think we know about it. So we misspeak, we misdiagnose, we miss all of that. So I think education is important for our churches.
I would say, and before I answer, because I don't like missing a question, Talifera, going back, Section 504 falls up under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So that's the difference. They're just two different acts, and one has less money. But I want to go back, so sometimes I have senior moments too. But what our churches can do, if you ask me, I went to a church in Philadelphia, and I wish I could think of the name of the church. And because I went to one church in Philadelphia 1 week and one the next week, I want to make sure I don't mix it up and give one church credit for what the other church was doing. But what I would tell you, when I went to this church, they were getting out into the community. And access is important. Making sure that children in the community have access to books. I mean, it's just that simple. You have people that are sitting at home in your pews that have hundreds of books, probably in their basements or in their attics that their kids read when they were kids. Now their kids going off to college. They need to bring those books to the church, to the churches, and the churches need to find a way to get those books into the community. Have a reading day on Sunday. Build your own library in your churches, and have the students from the kids from the community come with the parents, and they can pick out a book, or they can read, or even if it's as simple as I've seen people put a box out in front of their church with books in it, and then people who walk by, they can grab a book with the promise that they'll bring it back. Now you may not get them all back, but you know someone that wasn't reading before is now reading. So I think that's the biggest thing that we can do, is to educate, but also provide access.
And another thing, one of our churches, I think Berea Temple, I don't know if they're still doing this, but I remember we covered it once. They had an actual, well, it was computer literacy, but just a program at the church, like a literacy program at the church that they held weekly for people who just, these were adults. These were adults who wanted to strengthen their literacy skills and were coming faithfully week after week, and they had someone share with them. And then one of our Korean churches in Delaware, one of his methods was to teach English as a second language, so also literacy in another way. And that was one of their tools of evangelism, because when you help people with such a fundamental need, of course you're going to want to know more about who you are, and who's helping me, and why are you helping me. And so this is a great evangelistic opportunity for our churches to take advantage of. One, you're not just trying to lure people into the church, but you're helping them, because I was reading a statistic that says illiteracy has cost America $2.2 trillion or something astronomical. We don't realize that illiteracy around us impacts our economy, impacts our communities. And so if we can help make those stronger, we're helping our communities, we're helping our churches as well. So
like they say,
let me just share one idea I came across at a church. They had a library in the church, and it was called their reading room. And it had comfortable furniture, nice atmosphere, and invited children and adults to not only populate it with content, proper books, but they knew they had a place where they could go and read, just sit down comfortably and read. So if the physical plan of the church has the ability to designate a spot or a section and just call it the library or the reading room or the learning center or something like that, where they can go specifically there in the church to learn.
Or have study hall.
I love how Tosh said that it was evangelism, because we think as a church we only need to do feeding programs, some type of food distribution, but to teach people how to read and how to function in life and how to be able to make wealth is just as important as feeding them. And so it is our desire as a team today to make sure we understand the importance of literacy. And if by some means anyone who's hearing us today could be struggling, there is help for you, no matter what your age. All you have to do is start practicing, get someone to help you at your church or wherever, so that you can improve in that reading. I've seen people just really learn how to read at 70, 80, because when they were younger, they had to start working in the fields and things so that they could help provide for the family. And they never were able to read or write, but they learned before they left this earth. And so it's never too late. We pray that you will understand the importance of that and get to reading. Right.
That's right.
Butterfly in the sky.
Thank you, John, for being with us today.
Yes. We want to thank our special guest, Mr. Alberty, Superintendent of AEC School System.
Amen.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Better known as the soup. And that's not the kind you eat.
If you listen to the soup, it'll keep you out the stew.
Yes, thanks so much. One little note, I know we were saying October, but September is actually literacy awareness. We didn't get around to in September, so we
that's because we couldn't read it.
So, but October is ADHD awareness and dyslexia and so many other awareness months. But we just want to take advantage of being able to share this with the community. Please share this with someone else. Even if you can do something as simple as give a child a book, or, I mean, I'm just thinking about things individually that we can do to encourage literacy amongst our children. And sometimes we assume kids today don't want to read. That's not always the case.
No, not at all.
There's some young people who still love books, the bound books. So let's do our part to increase that. And let's be sensitive to those who may who learn differently, as I like to say, who learn differently than us. And let's advocate for these individuals as well. All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate the dialogue. Thanks again, John, for joining us. Please.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we'll have you back for another topic, I'm sure.
What large city were you working in before you came to Allegheny?
DC Public Schools.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good.
Okay.
That's all.
In DC.
Battlefield there.
He's got experience.
Let me tip my hat to this brother.
Southeast DC, but I will tell you, I loved all of my students. Oh man,
this was back when Anacostia was Anacostia,
important,
wasn't it?
That's very important. In fact, I saw a story on ABC News in our area. There's a young vice principal of a school, and every morning he's at the door to greet the students, and he hugs every single child.
Superintendent Albert used to do that. Albert used to do it, but he wasn't hugging them. He was patting them down.
Again, those comments are not of the Office of Education.
Yeah, get me in trouble. Mercy. Yes.
Oh, well.
Thanks again. All right, guys, if you want to continue to support the UpSet merch, you know what to do. Go to visitac.org/UpSet. We got to get ready for our next distribution, guys. Maybe we'll do it next week when we're live and share some ideas of what we can contribute to next. I know we wanted to contribute to some of our schools, John. They shared their wish list, and we were trying to see if we could help each school a little bit with the funds that we're getting from the UpSet merch. So we'll talk about that next week. But
help somebody.
Yes, that's what we're about. But all right, guys, we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Because if it's Sunday,
it feels like Sabbath is either coming or going.
Okay. See you later.
See you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.